So this portion of our conversation will be on Euthyphro. Euthyphro, not only the name of the dialogue, but of course the name of the person Socrates is speaking with. Just like the dialogue Credo, named after, who else? Credo. Okay, Euthyphro. This dialogue, written around 399 BC, and it is the dialogue leading up to the trial of Socrates. So here's a list of those dialogues surrounding the end of the life of Socrates. So Euthyphro, of course, you read Euthyphro Apology, which is not a dialogue at all, actually, and one of the maybe the only writing by Plato that is not a dialogue, and then Crito, Phaedo, etc. Okay, so this is where we are in Euthyphro, right? So Socrates is on his way up to the court, and Euthyphro is on his way out of court. Euthyphro would have, at this point in the trial that he's participating in, would have just recently presented an oral argument prosecuting his father. That was an interesting way to look at this particular act, right? You know, of course, the crime Euthyphro is accusing his father of committing, and this sort of crime, murder, especially murder of this particular type of person at the time, would not be a criminal act. It would be, the charges would not be criminal, they would be civil. So this would, normally a victim's family would bring these charges, but in this case, Euthyphro is taking it upon himself to bring these charges against his father. So Euthyphro is on his way out from doing this. Socrates, he's on his way in. This is going to be a kind of one of the initial hearings where Socrates will be able to hear the charges that are actually levied against him, most importantly by this guy Miletus. But again, all of that's in the Apology, which we are not reading. Okay, so how does Euthyphro relate? That is, why is it Euthyphro and not somebody else? Well, firstly, there are two principal reasons that Euthyphro is prosecuting his father. First, he needs to, or feels like he needs to, cleanse himself and his family of what I call the religious pollution caused by his father, that his father has breached divine law, right? So this is also, and I'll say a little about this shortly, this is why there is an important connection between piety and justice, right? That this is, in Euthyphro, you see these two terms conflated. That is, they are one and the same at the time, whereas we might consider piety as something separate. Piety, for the individuals in this dialogue, piety and justice are tied together. Okay, so what is Socrates on trial for? Again, interestingly enough, no accident. And of course, this is part of the reason why many believe that Socrates was a figment of Plato's imagination, that Socrates, just happened to be the star of all of these dialogues by Plato. I mean, how interesting that this that Socrates is facing trial himself for impiety, right? Firstly, because he's accused of not believing in the gods of the state. That is, the gods of the state, you can think about your Greek pantheon, right? They were polytheistic. Socrates had a unique view of the divine, of the gods, at least unique for his time. And secondly, he was accused of inventing his own gods, right? Now, Socrates talks about having a private daemon. You'll notice that that's going to be where we get our word demon. But of course, for Socrates, his daemon was his private spirit, the spirit that directed him towards, or well, I will not say towards right action, but his daemon directed him away from incorrect action. This is why in the Apology that he can be so kind of reckless. And that is because his daemon never tells him that he shouldn't be doing what he's doing. So that's how he knows he's doing the right thing. All right, and secondly, he is on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens. That is, the story goes that Socrates, after being told by the oracle at Delphi, that he is the wisest of all men, he goes around to try to prove that oracle wrong. How does he do that? He goes up to people in Athens that are purported to know, to really know things. And he asks them, right, tell me about justice, tell me about piety, right? And again, notice the focus is going to be on the virtues, right? And he's looking for that absolute, unchangeable definition of each of the virtues. And so, as Socrates is traveling around, questioning these people, he has an entourage with him, right? And this mainly consists of young people in Athens, young men following him around, getting to watch him prove all of these well-known individuals wrong. So we see that in the case of Euthyphro as well. So that's how he corrupts the youth, right? All right, in the dialogue Euthyphro, we get a couple of examples of Socratic irony. Socrates and the writing of Plato, of course, oftentimes humorous, due in no small part to the irony that we see there. So even at the beginning of this dialogue, you see that Socrates says, "Oh, Euthyphro, I am your student," right? He says, "Euthyphro, educate me on this particular matter. Show me." And the second bit of irony we see here, and this is a little more what we might call a complex irony, whereas the first we would consider a simple irony. The second, you'll notice that Socrates is the one charged with corrupting the youth. But as it turns out, at the same time, Euthyphro is a young person who is working to corrupt the old ways, the old social mores. So it's an interesting. It's interesting because the likelihood of these two bumping into one another, right, is, coincidence. Okay, so here are reasons why Socrates feels that Euthyphro is the person who can answer the question that Socrates is trying to get answered. And of course, that question is, what is piety? What is our correct relationship to the gods? So firstly, Euthyphro is, as were all of the interlocutors that Socrates questions, right? An interlocutor, this just means the person with whom which you are arguing, right? You are having, you are debating, you are arguing, and that's going to be that other person, that person you are interacting with. So Euthyphro is known in Athens to be a person who knows about religious things, right? Who knows the difference between piety and impiety, and he is known to speak at length on these matters. Secondly, Euthyphro is lodging a case against his father, so he obviously knows something about right and wrong. Thirdly, this is what's most important about Euthyphro, right, is that his charging his father, it's his family member here on the slide, but really it's our ancient Athenian society was absolutely patriarchal, right? And it is their society was based on the not just the legitimacy of male lineage, but that's where all the power of the state resided with males. So even something like a wife in ancient Greece, an Athenian wife could not own anything, absolutely could not be politically active, etc. So, and the father in a family held total control. So the idea that Euthyphro would prosecute his father, even for something like murder, right? That this would violate the social code of the time. This is just something that you would not do, that it would be an impious act to prosecute one's own father, no matter the event, right? So, this leads Socrates to believe that Euthyphro must have some special understanding of what piety is. That is, Euthyphro must know what justice is, and he must know it to the extent that the rest of Athens does not, that he knows something. He is uniquely educated in this particular matter, right? Because this is not something that everyday people would do. So he must have a special kind of knowledge, right? And that's exactly what Socrates is looking for, right? He wants to know what piety is, right? What is our correct relationship with the gods in terms of right and wrong? Also, his name, Euthyphro, it literally translates to straight thinker, and that straight here, not meaning sort of level-headed, but it means, he thinks in a very linear pattern, right? One after another after another. Whereas we might think of Socrates as being a more being able to, after reading the dialogue, right, in circles, right, is how Socrates proceeds, right? Okay, so the idea of piety here, and for Plato and others in Athens at the time, basically meant in accord with divine law. So you would not necessarily think of it the same way we think of piety, right, or being pious. As more of an attribute of us, right? So piety would mean being or following the dictates of divine law. So on the one hand, that law is divine, right? So it's something about the connection between divinity and people, right? The immortals and the mortals. But at the same time, it has this connotation that brings justice into the conversation. Justice meaning doing the right thing, right? Doing what is equitable, etc., etc. So that's how we get a conflation of piety and justice, right? Because on the one hand, the law is divine, so that's how the gods participate. And again, it's a law, so that's justice. Okay, so as these two talk, right, about what piety is, Socrates will demand that the definition Euthyphro gives for piety, it must first and foremost explain what is piety, right? What is our correct relationship to the gods as it concerns justice? Number two, this definition of piety must remain constant in all situations, right? That is, this definition must work no matter where you are, no matter who you are. This will always be the correct definition of piety. And again, consider how this relates to the Platonic form, right? That absolute unchanging thing. Right? And then number three, piety and impiety must be opposites. Now, why is this important, right? It seems self-explanatory. But the important thing here is that if you come up with a definition for piety, an impious thing cannot also fit under that definition, right? So if, so the definition of piety is X, So Socrates will not accept it if he can come up with an example of impiety that would also fit under that larger umbrella. Okay, so first and foremost, what are the answers that Euthyphro gives to this question, what is piety?